So if I can jump into the introductions, I'm Samantha Sutherland. I'm the moderator for today's conversation, and I also host Work 180's podcast. So if you're looking for some isolation entertainment, then check out Equality Talks on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. We have Valeria Ignatieva. She is CEO and co-founder of Work 180. Raising a son with special needs as a single mum, Valeria knows firsthand how important flexibility and support from your employer are to having a successful career and managing a family. She is so passionate about the success of every single one of our candidates that get roles with Work 180 endorsed employers, and has this wealth of information and personal stories about people's success. So hi to Valeria. And then our other panel member today is Gemma Lloyd, who is the other CEO and co-founder of Work 180. After Gemma experienced discrimination at work in the tech industry, she really wanted to flip the job-seeking model on its head and give power back to the job seekers. She is in the process of changing the world. So welcome to both of you. So today we're talking about managing a remote team, how you can support them, how you can set things up to support your team emotionally in everything that's going on at the moment, and in completing their work when there's a lot of additional pressures at the moment. So Gemma, I was hoping you could kind of set the scene, explain how Work 180 operates and why you're both specialists in managing remote teams. So why should people listen to you?
Sure, thank you, Sam. So Work 180, we've been around for over 5 years now, and 100% of our workforce, which is around 40 people spread across the UK, Australia, and also now the US, works remotely. That means they have always worked from home or wherever suits them best. So that might be a cafe or a co-working space, but this is just normal for us.
So Valeria, what do you think some of the biggest positives are about managing remote teams and working remotely?
Hi, everyone. So I guess for me, it's all about productivity and being able to access talent from essentially anywhere. So when I think of my own career, I've been working remotely actually for over 13 years prior to Work 180 with different employers, and just to be able to manage my day around life, as we all, have a life, that really does, I guess, come into your work environment as well. So being able to be productive in a remote environment is really powerful because, you might be, for example, if I take my own situation into account, needing to go to hospital appointments with your children, or maybe it's your elderly parents. If you were in an office, stuck, in an actual physical office, it's very difficult to continue that and to also be productive because obviously, you've got things on your mind. You can't plan your day easily if somebody is watching you like a hawk, whether or not you're at your desk and so on. And even before COVID-19 happened, I noticed a lot of changes in the last few years with some of our endorsed employers where, we had senior male leaders that would be working flexibly to usually care for their family. It might also be sporting commitments. There's lots of stories about senior leaders working to continue, for example, training for professional sporting teams and so on. And those are stories that you would never have heard previously. So 10 years ago, there's no way you could hold down a senior role and actually work remotely. So I think it does open us all up to a greater pool of talent, and also to be able to get the most out of your teams because they're able to work how best suits them, essentially.
And what do you think some of the biggest challenges have been along the way with managing a remote team?
Well, again, when I think back on, there was a company that I joined about 10 years ago. There was 20 people at that company. There was no office. And that was before you had, the Slacks and the Yammers that we have now. And we were communicating over email. So a lot of challenges that people are facing right now is actually mobilizing their whole workforce to be working from home because they might not even have the proper communication channels set up in place. You cannot be swift and agile emailing people, especially when you need to, communicate to a group of decision makers. So having things like Slack, which is what we use, it could be Microsoft Teams, it could be Yammer, is imperative to be able to have that, agility in your communications. Being mindful as well of the situation that we're in currently when booking meetings. So making sure that everyone's diary is up to date with not only their work meetings, but also personal commitments that they may have, and that might prevent them from being able to attend certain calls. So a lot of people are juggling parenting right now. So just being really clear with your teams around when you're available and being quite empathetic to everyone's situation, which is changing on a daily basis, is important. And the third one would be making sure that feedback is very much alive and well, and that goes both ways. So feedback from you as a manager to your teams, but also asking for feedback from your teams back to you around, is this working for them? You know, how can you improve? How can you help them? How can you improve communications? Are they clear on their roles and so on? So I think those three things, you know, communication, being mindful, and also keeping that feedback loop happening is crucial, more so than ever. Not that it ever hasn't been, but right now that's something that we really need to focus on.
Can I ask you a couple of follow-up questions on some of the answers you gave just then? So one is around the quick communication and using things like Slack or Microsoft Teams to communicate with your team. And where do you think the balance lies with I'm not sure if you can hear my
switch
child.
Glory back on.
Yeah. I'm obviously working with a child at home right now who's very entertained by Bluey. So one question was around with this kind of like expectation of time-based communication and people who are working from home feeling like they have to be at their desk every single second because they need to respond immediately to queries that come up. And what do you think where do you think the balance lies with that?
Well, I would certainly not advocate that you need to respond immediately. I guess what I mean by talking about those tools is that they're much more, much easier to communicate through those tools rather than email. And again, it's about working with your team and knowing their cadence. So for example, if I think of our team, I know that there's certain team members that have changed their working hours to work with their partners around the childminding scenarios. So they've actually put on Slack, these are available after 12 on Tuesday, for example. They've also blocked out their diaries. So, you know, you kind of know when your team, you should know when your team is available. And if you know that they're working at a particular time and they're not responding and they're not in a meeting, well, then that's when you pick up the phone and say, you know, is everything okay? And so on, without being a micromanager. But it's about being aware of the cadence that we will all have, which is quite different to, you know, pre-COVID at this point in time.
Yeah, and so that's the other thing I just wanted to pick up on, which is a conversation that we've had before. And also, Gemma, you talked about this before too, around having more empathy around people's situation at the moment, because it's not just working from home per the normal world. It's working from home often with a partner or flatmates or children at home and having that increased empathy. And I just wanted to say to everybody who's on the call as well that we're actually going to be doing a webinar on working at home with children. And just how much Bluey is acceptable for them to be watching during the workday. A lot, if you ask me. So Gemma, if I can go back to you and ask you, if you could give one or two tips to managers who are now trying to look after remote teams, what tips would you offer them in this phase?
Yeah, sure. So I think Valeria's covered quite a bit of it, but really what it comes down to in terms of managing a team effectively is a couple of things. So the first thing is really clear communication and really clear expectation and structure. So for example, every day our team, so we've got, you know, our marketing team, customer success team, sales team, they have a daily stand up. So it's 15 minutes, no longer than that, every morning, just to talk about any challenges for the day. And it's really, really super quick. And then every other meeting absolutely has a purpose and an outcome that needs to be derived from that meeting. Also making sure that you have one-on-ones with your team as well. You know, you've got to remember that in an office, people go out to lunch together and those sorts of things. So how are you having more casual chats as well as those more kind of task and work-based outcomes chats to make sure that you're checking in on a personal level as well as a work level. I think it's also really important to monitor the outcomes and the KPIs rather than time spent online or at a desk, which is pretty much impossible now. So as a manager, being very, very clear on what your expectations are, because really it starts with you and your ability to communicate what you expect, being clear on those things, and then just monitoring how things are being performed to that. One of the other challenges that we've had to face over the time is not just communication, I guess, within the teams, but cross-team communication, and how is information actually shared effectively from team to team without needing to be repeated. So it's something to think about as a manager, how you're all getting together as a group to share that down, to make sure that, you know, you don't have people in other teams coming saying what's going on in the marketing department and what are we doing here, or what's going on in sales or technology. So it's all about structure and outcomes and planning and purposeful conversations.
Yeah, great. Yeah, as an extrovert, the personal conversations is such an important one for me when working from home, because otherwise you can feel really disconnected. And even if you're catching up with people about work, it's nice to just have those like casual conversations with people and encourage your team to have them with each other as well, I think. So Valeria, what's been the biggest surprise or the most surprising thing you've learned through managing remote teams?
Something that really is common and that I guess continues to surprise me in a really nice way with Work 180 is I normally chat with our new starters about a week or 2 weeks into their time with us and ask them about their first impressions. And the most common theme, and it's probably 99% of everyone that I talk to says that they feel more connected to their teams. And this is also continuous, months later after they start with us. They feel more connected to their teams now that they work remotely than they have previously working in an office. And that is quite surprising in a way that, we have all been kind of brought up to assume that, you need to always be around people to get that connection. And by all means, nothing beats an in-person catch-up. We are all feeling that right now. But, I think that it's wonderful to be able to build that connection whilst working as a remote team. And another, I guess, way that this comes to life is something that happened on Slack, where one person was working on a presentation and they just put it out there and said, hey, I've done this presentation. I don't think they even asked for feedback. And this is where feedback culture is really important, because somebody jumped in and said, hey, they were from a completely different team as well, I need to add. And they just said, I think that maybe we could present this particular information that you're trying to put forward in a much more engaging and better way. And then somebody else jumped in and said, oh, have you seen this tool that can convert this information into a really pretty graph or something along those lines? So all in all, I think around 5 different departments jumped in, from UX to developers to marketing through to our COO. And by the end of it, that presentation was amazing. And you just think, if you replay that in an office environment, you're not going to get up from your desk and say, hey, everyone, check out this presentation, and then have 5 people come over to you and improve it. It just is not going to happen. So to me, that's a real life example of, if you nail the feedback culture and also have a really supportive team that's got your back, essentially, that is the feeling that you want to elicit from not only your new starters, but the people that are in the company already. So to me, I think that sums up really well around how you can, again, it's another great benefit of working remotely as well, that collaboration piece.
Yeah. So Gemma, when you are managing a remote team, it does rely on having enough trust in your team to not try and micromanage them from a distance. And in our last webinar around working remotely for individuals, we talked about the things you can do with your manager to try and increase their level of trust. But what do you do to help build and maintain trust with people who are working for you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, trust is always a given, right, at the very beginning. And I think that's really, really important with your teams, is that you start from a baseline of trusting them. And you as a manager then it goes back to what I was saying before, but you need to be really clear on what you expect from your teams and that level of communication, and then just let them get on with it. And then it's only if they're obviously not delivering to those expectations where trust is then broken. But the personal relationships and the empathy side and the feedback, the two-way feedback, is a really, really important component of a trusting relationship with the team. Because if people aren't able to deliver because there's a lot of people with things going on at home at the moment they didn't have to contend with before, but if they don't feel like they can be open and honest with you, they're not going to be able to deliver on the outcome. So you need to have that trusting relationship where you can discuss these things, and then you can set priorities in place or readjust KPIs or outcomes as needed.
And if you do have someone in your team with performance issues, I mean, especially now, there are teams that were fully formed and functioning that are now working remotely. And within some of those teams, there will be people who were having performance issues. So for someone in that position, how do you think they can manage these performance issues now that there's even more of a disconnect with that person day to day?
Well, you've just got to be really reasonable around what you're asking, first of all. So is what you're asking and your expectations reasonable given the current environment that we're in? And I know a lot of teams have, for instance, reduced their days from 5 down to 4. Have you adjusted KPIs accordingly? So as long as the expectations are set, and then, you know, I'm sure a lot of the managers here have been have done performance management, you know, types of things before, but it's exactly the same, you know, except it's in a virtual environment like Zoom. So I don't think there's probably too much difference there, Sam.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've said before in the past, like when companies don't really know what people are actually doing, then the amount of time that you're sitting at your desk becomes the last line of defense. And now we don't have that. And so I think it's a good opportunity for people who don't have really clear KPIs. So if you're a manager and you're thinking, I don't really know what my team is doing, so I don't know I want to micromanage them because I'm not clear on what's happening. Well, it's a really good opportunity to set really clear KPIs and guidelines with people and start that dialogue a bit more robustly, I think. And so Valeria, can I ask you, how do you keep remote teams connected? So you've talked a little bit about some of the tools like Slack and Yammer that we use, but especially when you're in this transition period, what would you focus on to try and make sure that teams remain connected and productive through all of this?
Sure. So, you know, Gemma touched on the regular catch-ups and the meetings, and also the one-on-ones are very crucial at this stage. We have, what I've noticed changed on our Slack channels recently is there are, you know, really a lot of engagement happening in channels outside of work. For example, you know, we've got a water cooler channel where people can just discuss things outside of work. There's also a pets channel, there's a plants channel, there's a favorite TV shows channel. So people are bonding through those methods a lot more. And the other thing that we've also noticed is we have a weekly wins call over Zoom. So it's a video call where anyone's invited to come and share a win or listen in. In the last 3 weeks, we've actually had the highest attendance and also the highest participation rates, where I think, you know, thinking about why that is the case, I was reflecting on the makeup of the team. So cultural diversity is playing a big part, because if you unpack all of that, a lot of us have actually gone through different hardships back in our home countries. So, you know, I'm from Russia. We've got people from all over the world that have experienced very, obviously not COVID, but things like food shortages, war, fear, and that really builds resilience. And it also has this, I guess, mentality of the glass is half full. So let's celebrate the wins, no matter how small they are. And it is so encouraging to see the team bond together at a time like this, where, you know, we could all be rightfully crying in the corner, but we're not. So I think that is super important. And as Gemma mentioned, you know, fostering those personal connections, those relationships. Right now, you know, a lot of people that I speak to, they don't really have much connections outside of work. So how do you make those connections stronger? And that is, yeah, those channels play a big part. We also have company wide meetings every Tuesday. So that's across the world, where everybody joins in, and we're very, very transparent about everything that's going on. And people, that was another bit of feedback that we received, that, you know, we've never seen such transparency before. It's really, you know, really nice to see a company talk about everything with their staff to that level. So being really open and honest. And also something that we all as leaders need to keep an extra eye on is, you know, you might be having your group catch up and somebody on the call may look slightly different or maybe quieter than usual. And whilst we ask everyone, are you okay in those group sessions, you know, you really do need to pick up the phone straight after that meeting and call them and check in on them. And it's got to be more than just, are you okay? Because often people want to, especially when people are worried for their jobs, just say, yep, everything's fine, I'm okay. But, you know, dig deeper, leverage those personal connections you've built up, and ask about their family. You know, it could be, you know, we've had somebody's mother pass away from COVID recently, you know, so people are facing an extreme level of stress, and they might be not affected, but somebody in their immediate circle could be. So it's really important that we're acutely aware of everything that's going on and provide as much support as possible during these times.
Yeah, and I think as well, you know, because everybody is facing so much uncertainty, you're right that people might not necessarily want to admit that things that they can't, you know, they might not want to pick up the phone and say, look, I'm really struggling to keep up with my work because I've got kids at home, or because I have a sick parent, or because I'm feeling really anxious about what's going on. And so as managers, creating that space for people to do that and do it in a really safe way, and being as honest as we can about what is happening and what we do have control over, what we know and what we don't know, is actually really important through this time, I think, as well. So can I ask both of you just kind of one at a time? We'll start with you, Gemma. If you could go back in time 5 years to the start of Work 180, what would you say to 5 years younger Gemma about how to make setting up a remote team as successful as possible?
Sure, I've learned so many lessons along the way. I think for me personally, it was really the personal connections piece that I was lacking, I think, in the earlier days of starting, because I think it's so easy when you work remotely and you've got Slack there to just jump on Slack and say, hey, can you get me X, Y, Z? But Slack, you've still got to, even if you're typing it in that kind of way, you still got to make sure you're putting in the effort to say, hi, how are you? How are you greeting the person? How are you greeting the person you're talking to like you would in an in-person kind of setting? And also making sure that on Zoom calls, when we jump on for the web conference, 1 to 2 minutes, how are you, families? All of that type of chat, I think is incredibly important. And then the other one, I think for me as well, is in a remote team, earlier on for Work 180, and we've gone through a lot of iterations and processes to get this working so incredibly well. So it's great to be able to share, all of this knowledge. But I don't think people really understood their individual impact on their teams and on the organization as a whole. And I think particularly in times of crisis like this, it's really important that people understand what they're part of and the bigger picture that they're influencing. And when you know how you impact things on a bigger level above yourself, it really helps to drive motivation and things like that, particularly if you're working at home in a more challenging environment where other temptations might be there, or personal life creeping into work life. If you're part of that bigger picture, it really, I think, does kind of enable you to focus more and be more productive and more motivated on what you're concentrating on.
Yeah. And Valeria, what would you add to that? If you could go back 5 years, what would you say to young V about making remote work as successful as possible?
I think I actually need to often take a step back and realize, because I've been doing it for so long, that it's very new to a lot of people, and I can't just assume that they know everything there is to know about remote working. And first it was just Gemma and I, and that's very easy to share information, to stay connected when there's just the two of you, you're crazy passionate. How do you scale that? And one thing, we talked a little bit earlier about that knowledge sharing, which I'm sure already exists in all the companies to a point, but it was been crucial for us to establish that ability to, have those kind of conversations captured that would normally happen around the water cooler in the business sense. So we've started a wiki, an internal wiki, in a tool called Nuclino. And at the moment, we're leveraging that tool to create a section. It's called Work 180 Life Hacks. And people are posting things in there like, home exercise techniques, articles that have been inspiring around how to look after your mental health, food delivery services, whatever it may be, to kind of capture that information. But then also that repository has information about customers and success stories and all these other things that you need to keep sharing as an agile, fast moving and high performing team. So being mindful of how you scale that knowledge sharing is really important to remember. That's something that I wouldn't have considered, because it's like I said, it's really easy when you have 2 people, 5 people, suddenly it's 40 people and growing. And also being a global company as well, how do you make sure that the other regions stay connected? And I'm sure a lot of people on this call have already worked with global teams previously, so it's a bit of I guess it's using that kind of theories across your teams locally as well, because now nobody's sitting together. And how do you make sure that you maintain that connection as well, as Gemma mentioned, and remembering why we're doing this and what's really important.
Yeah, and as you were talking as well, I was thinking, because at the moment people are doing it with established teams more than with growing teams, and the kind of equivalent of being you guys and then 5 people and then 40 people is making sure that no one in the team is left behind. So you might find that it's really easy to communicate and get in touch with half your team or 3/4 of your team. And then there's a few people where they're not engaging in the same way. And so how do you as a manager bring them along on this journey at the same time as everybody else?
Well, give them extra attention. So something else that we talk about is who are your MVPs? So your most valuable players and your most vulnerable players. And, you know, overnight you can have your most valuable player turn into your most vulnerable. And what that means is they need, you know, different types of support, and also a very close eye on, you know, who you feel is getting left behind, and just assessing your teams and making sure. And if you're not sure, pick up the phone. I've never ever had a conversation which felt like, oh, that was a waste of time, I shouldn't have called that person, I just annoyed them, or that was unproductive. You know, people are, more than you'd ever know, are happy to hear from you. And now's the time to celebrate the small wins and to call out anything, because, you know, you might have somebody sitting there completely distraught because, you know, people are facing, I've spoken to multiple people recently around the mother guilt. So they're feeling really guilty because their kids are at home and they feel inadequate in the fact that they can't homeschool them properly. So it's just reminding them that this is not going to last forever. And, you know, just talking through all these things which are ultimately clouding their productivity. And that is your job to drive that productivity at a time like this, you know. But it's about supporting them and making sure that, you know, sometimes it's just, yeah, somebody wants to talk to somebody else, and then you will find that their productivity will increase so much just because your manager cares. So, you know, now's the time to show that.
Yeah, great. So now we have time now for people who are on the call to ask questions. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask, then type it into the chat box. And if you want to actually speak, you can type that in as well. So then we can unmute you and you can ask your question. So do you have any burning questions about anything specific that's not working for you, or things you see happening, or ways to support your team? I can't see any questions coming in yet, but I'll just wait a couple of moments to see if anybody has something that they want to type in. So it could be on anything that Gemma and Valeria could offer suggestions on, or tools to help, or anything like that. I can't see any questions coming through.
Sounds like your questions might have been quite comprehensive, Sam.
That's what I like to hear. Okay, well, so if you do have questions as a follow-up, please do feel free to shoot them through. We have a really active Facebook group, which would be a great place to put them. And then we'll also just share a link with you now for our private LinkedIn group. So you can see the link is there, LinkedIn/groups/868-4873. And that is for professionals championing gender equality, and it's moderated by Work 180. We put in useful tips and tricks and information in there, and then we also use it as a place to connect our networks of people. So feel free to join on that as well. From here, we're having another number of webinars. So we're going to have one specifically, like I mentioned earlier, on working from home with kids and with partners, and with all the disruption that's currently happening. We know it's not the same as your usual work from home. And we're going to have a session on managing anxiety, and we're going to have another session as well on kind of work from home fatigue as we get further into this process and it becomes the new normal. How do we actually start to manage that? Okay, we have a question coming through, which is great. So if people are unwilling to video call, which is important, how can you encourage them to video chat?
David, I don't know if we could take David off mute, perhaps. Do you have an idea why they might be unwilling at all? Have they shared anything at all with you?
David, you've been.
No, I think they're just unwilling. Just because I guess it's just very new to them to actually work remotely. I guess people might be embarrassed about their background or how they're looking at the moment. I guess just more uncomfortable with this new sort of technology. But if they work from home, that video chatting is actually very good for connectivity. It just makes you feel connected. Where if you're just chatting normally on the phone, it just doesn't really have that. It's really helped me like just work well with people, not feel disconnected. But
yeah, well, we've got a background which maybe, Sam, we can share in the notes afterwards, the kind of dimensions for it. It's really, or you can just upload any picture really into your Zoom background, as you see Gemma and I have done. So, you know, if it's an unprofessional background, which sometimes, you know, you might have no space in your house to actually have something like that, that could be solved easily. Zoom also actually has a bunch of virtual backgrounds that you can select. So we could share instructions on that. David, I'd be very mindful as well that with domestic family violence on the rise, that is something that we all need to be really mindful of, because if somebody is a domestic violence victim, that could be a reason why they might not be comfortable going on video as well. So we're doing a piece around that to raise awareness and to share what other endorsed employers in our network are doing to pivot their domestic violence policies through to this virtual world. But if that's not the case, I think just encouraging, there's lots of articles going around as well. So maybe just sharing some stories and obviously, leading by example and just kind of saying, let's all jump on the video call. I haven't seen you for ages. It'll be really nice. Even if it's not for them, it's maybe for the other team members so that they can be a bit of a role model as well. Because we all know that it's the next best thing to, not being able to see each other in person. Does that help?
So yeah, I think I guess encouraging people and just asking them just keep encouraging, I guess, is probably the best way to go. And then just, I guess, putting forward the benefits of video chatting around connectivity and just I guess, just because body language as well is such a big part of communication. If you just take that away, sometimes the point can get missed. I think it's my strategy just to keep on just reiterating those points, and then hopefully they just come across.
Yeah, we've always encouraged people to jump on video, but more recently we've kind of started reminding people that unless you've got, kids jumping all over you in the background and it's really distracting for everyone else, please make an effort because, again, it's not just about putting the pressure on, I need to see you and I need to, micromanage you or whatever it is. It's about, for everybody else, being able to see each other's faces is much healthier for the whole team.
Yeah,
there's a question for Alicia as well. Yeah, connectivity. You can upgrade your internet as well, which I recently found out. A lot of people had to do that when they started working from home. So maybe checking in with their provider and seeing if that could be improved.
I have another question that's come through just privately to me, so you won't be able to see that. Someone on the call has asked, I'm really keen to understand how to engage someone who doesn't want to engage. So I have a team of sole operators and I'm their new leader. This situation creates an opportunity to engage as a team together, but there is some resistance. So how would you manage that resistance to bring a team of this sole operators together?
I'd want to understand the reason. There's always a reason for these things, we really need to seek to understand first, because it might be because they're not used to it. It might be, there might be a competitiveness going on. I mean, we've never really had that issue because we really explain at interview stage what we're all about. But again, it's going back to the values and the goals and what you're trying to achieve, and not collaborating is not on the list. I don't know, Gemma, if you've got something to add to that.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's seeking to understand why that would be the case, and then understanding what that person's own drivers and motivations are, and then aligning the value of a group collaboration with that person's values and own ambitions. But it's kind of a difficult one to ask when you don't really understand the why. But before we ever do anything, if someone acts in a way that we don't think is aligned with kind of what we're looking for, we always seek to understand and give people the benefit of the doubt first, as there might be another reason for that.
And I've just asked for Tanya to be unmuted. So she's the one who asked the question. She might be able to explain a little bit further. I'm not sure if she has been unmuted yet. Tanya, can you speak?
Hi there.
Hi.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make it a private question. I just wasn't quite sure what the etiquette was. So, as I've worked for my company for a number of years and have built teams overseas and then come back into the Australian business into quite an established team. And I guess there's a culture of a bit of competitiveness. There's definitely a lack of trust. And I'm a couple of months into the job, and there is definitely a change piece. So I think this does bring the opportunity to the fore to really bring the group together. So that's quite exciting. But I've done a few things along the lines of what you've suggested. So, for example, overseas, we used to have daily huddles. There's been complete resistance to that up until now. But it's just happening. But then I get people ringing me offline saying, I'm too busy for this. I don't want to listen to this. And so some of the discussions I've been having with these people is, look, you're home with a family. there's other people in the team who are stuck by themselves. So trying to appeal to that empathy. But it continues to just be a struggle. So any tips, really gratefully received. Thank you.
Good point there from Beatrice from Work 180. So maybe, was that for David? I was going to say that's probably a good idea for you as well, actually. Do they ever connect outside of work on any topic outside of work?
There's probably little pockets. So it's a team of 14 spread across Australia. So, for example, we've got 2 people in Perth who are very strongly connected to each other. There's groups within Sydney that are, Friday drinks and the like, but it's not necessarily an inclusive thing.
Something that I didn't mention earlier is we've got a tool called Donut, which plugs into Slack and I'm sure plenty of other systems. It actually randomizes the connections and sets up a one-on-one catch up for half an hour with anyone in the company. And, we've also we've made sure that those catch ups are not work related. And, I've seen people in the UK catch up with somebody in Australia and their jobs would never cross over in the traditional kind of sense. And that has built up so much camaraderie, and that's really important in any company, but more so with teams that are actually, you want them to be closer together. So maybe that could be a tool. But we all know that once you start connecting with somebody on a different level outside of work, you're more inclined to, want to spend time with them, want to help them. And I think that's probably something that could be your next thing to try. Because if you get them talking together more around things that, bond them, to create that sense of camaraderie, you probably find them more willing to accommodate the things that you're trying to achieve on a professional level as well. And even like in their one-on-ones, could that be a discussion around, hey, this is where I'd really like to see you be more of a, team player essentially. And that means showing up to those calls. And if the problem is timing, what is a good time for you? Let's put a poll out. Let's be really fair. It's got to work for everyone. So I think, there's definitely a few things that hopefully can shift the dial on this.
So we have another question, which is actually kind of similar, that you might give a similar answer. So what are some of the strategies that you'd suggest that managers leverage to encourage teams to check in on each other without the manager having to lead the call? So Valeria, you mentioned Donut, which we use, which does this randomized matching so people meet up with each other. Gemma, do you have something else that you might add to that around how you encourage teams to meet up without having to be led by the manager in doing so?
To be honest, I don't actually, because Donut is what does that for us. We have some teams have, like the tech team has Friday drinks, and no managers, actually up until recently. So the tech team always had Friday drinks, and now that was kind of their own initiative. And now what's happened with COVID, it's turned into an all of company initiative where we, it's obviously opt-in, but we will jump into that. And we have also had suggestions of trivia as well across the company. There was also a suggestion the other day around like a lunch and learn, which would obviously be opted in as well. But I think, posing the question to the teams as well and putting it on them and saying, do you have any ideas, or do you want to be more connected? Can we come up with something that kind of facilitates that a little bit more, given the feelings of isolation that people have at this time?
Yeah, I agree. Put the challenge out to them around, crowdsourcing ideas, because it's more about getting their buy-in as well. It's like, hey, who's got any suggestions on how we can stay connected? Because then what you want is somebody starting something that other people want to join. For us, it's Slack channels of common interest. So, Gemma and I did not start the plants, the pets, or the TV show channels at all. And then you've got people in there who've got a common interest that are from different departments, and they can bond on certain things that, that they share.
Yeah, and I think also it's important to kind of realize that maybe early on it does have to be driven by you as a manager to get it started, and then people will buy into it a little bit more. So there might be an element of having to encourage people to do it first, and then you kind of crowdsource it and they do it.
Yeah, and don't get discouraged if something fails. That's okay. You can try and start something, and then you can get other people to try and start something, and not everything will take off and flourish, but at least, there's efforts being made.
I've seen people do like fitness classes in the morning as well on Zoom. So there's lots and lots of different things, but I think asking the team does bring them on the journey to get the buy-in, and then you're actually doing something that they really want. And I can probably quite confidently say that most people, like a lot of people, will really, really be craving that at the moment, given we're so restricted in what we can do.
Yeah, I mean, we're all noticing that in our personal life too. I've never had so many video chats with friends in my life. So we've come to we have another question. What is a platform that we use to share the Work 180 life hacks? Yeah, it's called Nuclino. And so it's sort of like a wiki that we can enter information into, and you can start new pages on different topics. So we will send out a follow-up to this, and it will have links to stuff like Nuclino and Slack and Donut, which are the tools that we've mentioned on the call. And so there's no other questions have come through, so that brings us to the end of today.
Bluey must be finished.
So thank you all so much for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you at a webinar in the future.